The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, its sound echoing through the massive Westbrook estate. Elena Martinez Westbrook stood frozen in her husband's study, a leather-bound document trembling in her hands. The door was ajar behind her, late afternoon sunlight spilling across the polished oak floors, illuminating dancing dust particles in the air. 6 months of marriage. 6 months of whispers behind her back, of tight smiles and cold shoulders from her husband's family. 6 months of being the outsider, the gold digger, the Latina trophy wife who'd somehow managed to snare Robert Westbrook, heir to one of Boston's oldest fortunes, and now this. Elena's eyes scanned the document again, making sure she hadn't misunderstood. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear enough. In the event of his death, Robert was leaving the bulk of his considerable estate, nearly $40 million, to his family foundation. Elena would receive a modest monthly stipend, barely enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to, and only for 5 years. After that, nothing. They'd been married for half a year, and he'd never mentioned this. The sound of car tires on gravel interrupted her thoughts. She moved to the window, watching as her husband's Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway. He wasn't supposed to be home for hours. The Thursday board meeting usually ran until at least 6. Elena quickly returned the will to the hidden wall safe she'd accidentally discovered while searching for a particular book Robert had mentioned. She had only checked inside out of curiosity, never expecting to find something like this. She closed the safe door, sliding the painting back into place just as she heard the front door open. "Elena?" Robert's voice called from the foyer. "Are you home, darling?" She took a deep breath, composing herself. "In your study," she called back, her slight accent more pronounced than usual due to her agitation. Robert appeared in the doorway, tall and distinguished at 45, his salt and pepper, hair perfectly styled as always. He smiled when he saw her, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had first drawn her to him at the museum fundraiser where they'd met, narrowed slightly with concern. "Is everything all right?" he asked, loosening his tie as he stepped into the room. Elena forced a smile. "Yes, of course, the meeting ended early." Robert nodded, crossing to the bar cart to pour himself a scotch. "Mother wasn't feeling well, so we postponed some of the agenda items." He took a sip, studying her over the rim of his glass. "You look upset." Eleanor hesitated. They'd promised honesty to each other, always. It had been their first pact, sealed, with champagne on their 3rd date. But this was different. This felt like a betrayal. "I was looking for that book you mentioned, the Hemingway," she said, deciding in that moment to confront it directly. "I thought you said it was behind your desk?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "It should be on the 2nd shelf, not behind the desk. I must have misunderstood." Eleanor stepped closer to him, her heart racing. "Robert, I found the safe." His expression didn't change, but she noticed his grip tighten on the glass. "I see." "I opened it," she continued, watching him carefully. "I saw the will." Robert was silent for a long moment, then sighed, setting down his drink. "I should have told you about it." "Yes, you should have." Eleanor's voice was steady despite the turmoil inside her. 6 months of marriage, and I find out by accident that you don't trust me enough to leave me provided for if something happens. To you? "It's not about trust, Eleanor," Robert said, rubbing his forehead. "The will was drawn up before we met. I simply haven't updated it yet." 6 months, Robert, Eleanor repeated. "That's more than enough time to make a phone call to your lawyer." Robert looked away, and in that moment Elena knew. This wasn't an oversight, it was deliberate. "Are your family?" she said softly. "They convinced you not to change it." His silence was confirmation enough. "They never thought I married you for love," Elena continued, pain evident in her voice. "Your mother, your sisters, they've been waiting for me to reveal my true colors since the day we met." "They don't know you like I do," Robert said, finally meeting her eyes again. "They're just protective." "Protective?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Is that what we're calling prejudice these days?" Robert flinched at the word. "That's not fair, Elena. It has nothing to do with your background. My family would be suspicious of anyone I married so quickly." "Are you sure about that?" Eleanor challenged. "Because I've heard the comments, Robert, about my accent. about how I grew up in East LA, about how surprising it is that I'm so articulate." She made air quotes around the last words. Robert had the grace to look ashamed. "I've spoken to them about that. Clearly not firmly enough." Elena crossed her arms. "But this isn't about them. It's about you. You married me, promised to share your life with me while secretly ensuring I'd have no security if something happened to you." "That's not," Robert began, but Elena cut him off. "Do you think I'm a gold digger too, Robert? Is that it? After everything I've shared with you about my life, my dreams, my work, do you really believe I married you for your money?" The pain in her voice seemed to reach him. Robert crossed the room, taking her hands in his. "No, Elena, I know you love me. I love you too, more than I've ever loved anyone." "Then why?" she whispered. Robert sighed deeply. "It's complicated. The Westbrook fortune. It comes with obligations, traditions. The family foundation has always been the primary beneficiary of each generation's wealth." "I understand that," Elena said. "I've never expected to inherit everything. But to leave, me with almost nothing, to not even discuss it with me." Robert looked genuinely contrite. "You're right. I should have told you." He squeezed her hands. "I'll call Parker tomorrow and have him draw up a new will. I promise." Elena searched his face, wanting to believe him. "Your family won't be happy." "My family will have to accept that you're my wife now," Robert said firmly. "You come first." The words should have reassured her, but something still felt off. The discovery of the will had cracked open a door Elena had been keeping firmly shut, the door that held all her doubts about whether she truly belonged in Robert's world. "I need some time to think," she said, gently pulling her hands away. "I'm going for a walk." Robert looked like he wanted to protest, but nodded instead. "Of course, we'll talk more when you get back." Eleanor left the study, grabbing her light jacket from the foyer closet. As she stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, she tried to sort through her tumultuous thoughts. She had met Robert 13 months ago, a chance encounter at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts where she'd been working as a grant coordinator. Their connection had been immediate and intense. Within 3 months, he'd proposed. Elena, swept up in a whirlwind romance unlike anything she'd experienced before, had said yes, despite warnings from friends who thought it was too fast, too unequal. Her parents had been more supportive, though her father had taken Robert aside for a long private conversation before giving his blessing. Her mother had simply held her hands and said, "Make sure he sees you, all of you, not just what he wants to see." Had Robert ever truly seen her? Or had he, like his family, been unable to see past her background, her accent, her otherness? Eleanor walked for nearly an hour through the exclusive Beacon Hill neighborhood, past historic homes and perfectly manicured gardens. By the time she returned to the house, darkness had fallen, and she had made a decision. She found Robert in the kitchen, staring at his laptop, a half-eaten sandwich beside him. He looked up when she entered, relief evident on his face. "You were gone so long," he said. "I was starting to worry." Elena took off her jacket, draping it over a chair. "I needed to clear my head." She sat across from him at the kitchen island. "Robert, we need to talk about more than just the will." He closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening." "When we got married," Elena began carefully, "I knew what people thought, what some still think. The Latina from a working-class background snagging the wealthy white heir. The classic gold digger narrative." She held up a hand when Robert started to protest. "Let me finish, please." He nodded, silent. "I told myself it didn't matter what others thought as long as we knew the truth. But now I'm wondering if you ever really believed in us, in me, the way I thought you did. Eleanor, I love you." Robert insisted. "If I made a mistake with the will—" "This isn't just about the will," Eleanor interrupted. "It's about whether you actually see me as your equal partner. Because I've been compromising since the day we got married, changing how I dress, how I speak, who I spend time with, all to fit into your world. But I'm starting to think your world will never truly accept me." Robert looked stricken. "I had no idea you felt this way." "Because you never asked," Elena said simply. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Robert spoke. What do you want to do? Elena took a deep breath. I think we need some time apart. I need to remember who I am outside of being Mrs. Westbrook. She twisted her wedding ring absently. I'm going to stay with my friend Marisol for a while. Elena, please. Robert's voice was pained. Let's work this out together. I'm not saying it's over, Elena clarified. I'm saying I need space to think clearly, without your family's whispers and this house and all the expectations that come with being your wife. Robert looked devastated, but nodded slowly. If that's what you need, I won't stop you. But Elena, please know that I married you because I love you. Who you are, where you come from, all of it. I want to believe that, she said softly. But right now, I'm not sure I do. The next morning, Elena packed a suitcase and called a car. Robert watched helplessly as she prepared to leave, making one last plea as she stood at the door. How long will you be gone? Elena shook her head. I don't know. I'll call you in a few days. As the car drove away from the Westbrook estate, Elena felt both a crushing sadness and an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time in 6 months, she was making a decision solely for herself. Marisol, her closest friend since college, welcomed her with open arms and no judgment. Her small apartment in Jamaica Plain was the polar opposite of the Westbrook mansion, cozy, cluttered, and full of life. Mi casa es tu casa, Marisol said, showing Elena to the pull-out couch. Stay as long as you need. That night, over homemade, sancocho and a bottle of wine, Elena told Marisol everything. So what are you going to do? Marisol asked when Elena had finished her story. Are you thinking about divorce? I don't know, Elena admitted. I love him, Marisol. That hasn't changed. But I can't be with someone who doesn't truly respect me, who keeps secrets like this. Marisol nodded thoughtfully. You know what my abuela would say. La verdad no mata, pero incomoda. The truth doesn't kill, but it makes you uncomfortable. Elena smiled weakly. Your abuela was a wise woman. The wisest, Marisol agreed. She'd also say you should follow your heart, but take your brain with you. The days stretched into a week, then 2. Robert called daily at first, then gave her the space she requested, sending only occasional texts to check in. Elena used the time to reconnect with herself, volunteering at a local community center, where she'd worked before meeting Robert, meeting up with old friends, speaking Spanish freely without worrying about making anyone uncomfortable. It was during her 3rd week away that she received an unexpected call from Amanda Westbrook, Robert's mother. Elena, the older woman's crisp voice came through the phone. I'd like to meet with you. Alone. Elena was surprised by the request. In all the time she'd known Robert, his mother had never sought her out independently. May I ask why? Elena replied, equally formal. There are matters we need to discuss, Amanda said vaguely. Would tomorrow at 3 be convenient? The tea room, at the Fairmont. Curiosity won out over apprehension. I'll be there. The next day, Eleanor dressed carefully in a simple but elegant navy dress, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She arrived at the upscale hotel precisely at 3, finding Amanda already seated at a corner table, immaculate as always in a cream Chanel suit. Thank you for coming, Amanda said as Elena sat down. A server immediately appeared to pour tea. Neither woman spoke until he had departed. Robert doesn't know I've contacted you, Amanda began, stirring a small spoonful of honey into her tea. He would likely disapprove. I imagine he would, Eleanor agreed, watching her mother-in-law carefully. Amanda set down her spoon with a soft clink. I'll be direct, Eleanor. When my son married you, I had reservations. Robert has always been impulsive, prone to grand gestures. I feared you were simply his latest impulse. Eleanor felt her jaw tighten but remained silent. The will you discovered, Amanda continued, was my suggestion. I advised Robert to wait, to be certain before making changes that could impact generations of Westbrook legacy. I see, Elena said coolly. And did you also advise the rest of the family to treat me like an interloper? Amanda had the grace to look slightly abashed. Perhaps I set a tone that was less than welcoming. That's one way to put it, Elena, replied. Amanda studied her for a moment. You're angry. You have every right to be. I'm not angry, Mrs. Westbrook, Eleanor said. I'm disappointed. Not just in you or your family, but in Robert. He should have been honest with me from the beginning. Yes, Amanda surprised her by agreeing. He should have been. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard by the admission. My son loves you, Elena, Amanda continued. In all his 45 years, I've never seen him as devastated as he has been these past weeks without you. If you've brought me here to plead his case, I've brought you here to apologize, Amanda interrupted. Another surprise. And to give you this. She reached into her handbag and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table to Elena. With hesitant fingers, Elena opened it, unfolding the document inside. It was a new will, properly executed and notarized, dated just 1 week after. Elena had left. In it, Robert had made her not only the primary beneficiary of his personal fortune, but also appointed her to the board of the Westbrook Foundation. He did this without telling me, Amanda said, a hint of grudging respect in her voice. The first time in his life he's directly gone against my wishes. Elena stared at the document, emotions swirling. Why are you showing me this? Because you deserve to know that my son has chosen you over family tradition, over my objections, over everything. Amanda took a sip of her tea before continuing. And because I was wrong about you, Elena. Elena looked up, startled. When you left, Amanda explained, you could have taken him for everything. A woman who married for money would have filed for divorce immediately, hired the most aggressive lawyer in Boston. But you didn't. She set down her cup. Instead, you went back to volunteer work, to a modest apartment, to the life you had before. That told me everything I needed to know about your character. Elena wasn't sure how to respond. I never wanted Robert's money, she said finally. I just wanted his trust, his respect. And now you have both, Amanda replied, along with something I rarely give, my respect as well. Elena looked down at the will again, then carefully refolded it and returned it to the envelope. Thank you for showing me this, but if Robert wanted me to know, he would have told me himself. He's afraid, Amanda said simply. Afraid that reaching out might push you further away. Afraid that you've realized you're better off without the complications that come with being a Westbrook. Elena considered this. And what do you think? Now, Mrs. Westbrook, am I better off without those complications? Amanda's lips curved in the barest hint of a smile. I think you're more than capable of handling them. And please, call me Amanda. 2 days later, Elena stood once again at the door of the Westbrook mansion. This time, instead of leaving, she was returning, but on her own terms. Robert answered her ring almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting nearby. The relief on his face when he saw her was palpable. Elena, he breathed her name like a prayer. You're here. We need to talk, she said, stepping inside. He led her to the living room where they sat across from each other, the coffee table between them like neutral territory. First, Eleanor began, I want you to know that your mother came to see me. Robert's eyebrows shot up in surprise. My mother? Eleanor nodded. She showed me the new will, Robert. He closed his eyes briefly. I was going to tell you about it, but I wanted to give you the space you asked for. Why did you do it? Elena asked. Change the will so completely? Even appoint me to the foundation board? Robert leaned forward, his eyes intense. Because you were right, about everything. I didn't give you the respect you deserved as my wife, as my partner. I let my family's traditions and my mother's influence guide decisions that should have been ours to make together. He ran a hand through his hair. When you left, I realized what I stood to lose. Not just my wife, but the woman who had brought more joy and meaning into my life than I'd ever known. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes but blinked them back. And your mother, the rest of your family, they're okay with this? Robert gave a small laugh. My mother actually suggested the foundation board position, said if you were going to be a Westbrook, you should have a say in how the Westbrook legacy continues. He shook his head in amazement. I think you impressed her somehow. We came to an understanding, Eleanor said with a slight smile, and the others will follow her lead as they always do. Robert reached across the coffee table, offering his hand. The real question is, can you forgive me? Will you come home? Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand, then into his eyes. "I have conditions. Anything," he said without hesitation. "First, no more secrets. Ever." She counted off on her fingers. "Second, we make decisions together, especially about our future. Third," her voice softened slightly, "I want us to spend more time in my world, not just yours. Meet my cousins in LA. Visit my parents more often. Attend events in communities that matter to me." "Done," Robert agreed to each point. "Anything else?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "Yes. I want us to use some of the foundation funds to create a scholarship program for first-generation college students from immigrant families. I want to run it." Robert's face broke into a wide smile. "I think that's a brilliant idea. My mother might even approve. It's exactly the kind of legacy building she's always talking about." "So we have a deal?" Elena asked, still not taking his hand. "We have much more than a deal," Robert said earnestly. "We have a fresh start." Finally, Elena reached across and took his hand. "Then I'm home." 3 months later, Elena stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, addressing the assembled guests at the annual Westbrook Foundation Gala. Robert watched proudly from the front table, seated beside his mother, who was listening with unusual attentiveness. "Today I'm honored to announce the launch of the New Horizons Scholarship Initiative," Elena spoke confidently, her slight accent undiminished. "This program will provide full university scholarships to 20 first-generation students from immigrant families each year, along with mentorship and professional development opportunities." Applause rippled through the crowd. "As someone who was once a scholarship student myself," Elena continued, "I know firsthand how education can transform not just one life, but generations to come. This initiative represents the best of the Westbrook legacy, using privilege to create opportunity, using wealth to build bridges rather than walls." From her seat, Amanda Westbrook raised her champagne glass in a subtle toast. Eleanor acknowledged it with a small nod before continuing. "My husband Robert likes to tell people that I changed his life when we met." She smiled in his direction. "What he doesn't say is how much he changed mine, not because of his name or his resources, but because he ultimately chose to see me, really see me, and to stand by my side as an equal partner." After the speech, as guests mingled and champagne flowed, Eleanor found herself momentarily alone near the terrace doors. A server passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and she selected one with a smile of thanks. "Quite a speech," came Amanda's voice from behind her. "You've made quite an impression on Boston society tonight." Elena turned to face her mother-in-law. "That wasn't my goal." "I know," Amanda said, surprising her again. "That's why it worked." She glanced across the room to where Robert was speaking with some foundation donors. "He looks happy, happier than I've seen him in years." "I think we both are," Eleanor replied honestly. Amanda nodded, then said something unexpected. "My husband's family didn't approve of me either, you know." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Oh yes. Public school teacher from Vermont. Hardly the society bride they had in mind for their son." A rare smile softened Amanda's usually stern features. "It took me years to win them over. You've managed it in months. I'm impressed." Before Elena could respond, Robert appeared at her side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Everything okay here?" he asked, glancing between his wife and mother. "More than okay," Elena assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Your mother was just telling me some family history." "Ancient history," Amanda corrected with a wave of her hand. "The future is much more interesting." She nodded toward a group of donors by the bar. "And speaking of the future, the Abbotts over there have expressed interest in contributing to your scholarship fund, Elena. Shall we?" As they moved through the crowd together, Elena, Robert, and Amanda, heads turned to watch. The whispers that followed were no longer about the gold-digging Latina who'd somehow snared a Westbrook. Instead, they were about the impressive woman who was reshaping one of Boston's oldest family foundations, bringing fresh perspective and purpose to a legacy that had grown perhaps too comfortable in its traditions. Later that night, as Elena and Robert drove home, she gazed out at the city lights reflecting on the harbor. "Penny for your thoughts," Robert asked, reaching over to take her hand. Elena smiled, thinking of how far they'd come in just a few months. I was just thinking about how sometimes the most difficult moments in our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Robert squeezed her hand. I'm just grateful you gave us a second chance. Me too, Eleanor said softly. Me too, as they pulled into the driveway of the Westbrook estate, their home. Eleanor felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since before discovering the will. She had come into this marriage as an outsider, facing prejudice and doubt from a family set in their ways. But instead of allowing those forces to diminish her, she had stood firm in her worth, demanding respect not just for herself, but for others like her, and in doing so, she hadn't just found her place in the Westbrook family, she had transformed. Have you ever been underestimated because of your background or where you come from? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories about overcoming prejudice and finding your voice.